I want to begin with looking into the future and talking about what success looks like. And I think there's two halves to that question. First, to hear your reflections on how you think in Europe you will measure success in your Indo-Pacific strategy, your Indo-Pacific engagement in the medium term, whatever you want to call that, whether that's 10 years, 15 years, but over a substantial period of time. And I guess aligned to that question is to wonder about how do you ensure staying power? How does Europe keep its eyes on this game?
On that second point first, I mean, I think what I said at the end is vital. In other words, that one of the key priorities of the EU at the moment is our economic competitiveness. And I think this is absolutely crucial for anything that we want to do in the wider world. So allied to that is our economic security strategy, to be maybe a bit less naive about operating economically in today's world. And obviously trying to resolve the little matter of Russia's invasion would be a big help for our capacity to do things in the wider world as well. So those, I think, are some of the things that we need to do to ensure staying power into the future. I think for me, what we're looking for in the strategy over the medium term is really to complete the network of free trade agreements that we are currently negotiating. It is to really make a very proactive contribution across the Indo-Pacific region to the energy transition, to bring our partners closer to achieving their zero carbon goals, and to do whatever it takes to enhance the resilience of those partners most threatened by climate change. And this is something we have to do urgently. I mean, it's obvious in every part of the world that there are climate incidents now which require us to tackle this issue now, not closer to 2030 or 2050. And in the security field, as I tried to say, we're going to have to reform the international rules-based order to bring everyone with us on the journey of ensuring that the basic functions of the UN with its three pillars, including that concerning human rights and universal values of individual liberties, are maintained as part of the forefront of the way the international system works. But to do that, we will need to cooperate with our partners. And that's why I think our Indo-Pacific strategy implementation is going to be an important element of that. But more broadly, obviously, we hope that the Indo-Pacific remains an area of peace and prosperity. The EU is only one actor in trying to ensure that, of course. But as you've heard, this President of the European Commission has talked about an increasingly geopolitical EU, and that's certainly what those of us in the Foreign Service of the EU are helping to bring forward.
Thank you, and we'll come back to a few elements of that shortly. I think particularly the China factor is something that we should bring out in the conversation. But I want to wind back, I guess, to a more personal level first. You've been in the role now, I think, for about 18 months, and of course, I didn't sort of go into detail about your own career background before that, but of course, you came to this role not as a specialist in this region, but with other very deep specialisation that matters to Europe's place in the world, and looking particularly, I think, at Europe's eastern flank. So I'd like to think that engaging with the challenges of the Indo-Pacific was perhaps a little bit calmer for you, but nonetheless, it's a very diverse and complex region. And one of the challenges we have in this country is precisely the diversity of this super region, the fact that there are different levels of development, there are, if you like, unresolved conflicts in this region that we need to understand and navigate through. Just any insight on your own, I guess, your own journey to get to know the Indo-Pacific in the past 18 months, including your travels in the region, your dialogues, your key touch points there. It'd be useful to learn a little bit more about your story.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, I hope that my experience, I mean, people say that trouble follows me around because I started in the EU institutions in 2003. Immediately, Georgia, the country I was dealing with, had its Rose Revolution. I then moved on to Russia. We had the Litvinenko poisoning, Polish beef bans.
Please leave.
I won't go through the whole litany of things that have tended to happen when I've been on those particular desks. But it shows the world that we're living in. I think since the early 2000s. I think respecting the diversity of the Indo-Pacific is one thing that you have to understand if you want to make an impact. And I think we Australia, we EU have both appreciated this in our high-level meetings with the ASEAN countries, even though I think we both regard ASEAN as a key player. We, EU, obviously see ASEAN as a very important effort to encourage regional integration in the region. But it's clear that the countries of ASEAN are very diverse. So you have to reach out to the individual countries to make your case in an effective way with each of them. So last year I did go to Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, and got 3 different takes, if you like, on how the countries see the region, and how the EU can play a constructive role in supporting that. I visited Japan and Korea, obviously 2 of our key like-minded partners, and I think it's been very, very pleasing over the past few years to see the improvement in their bilateral relationship, which I think for all of us partners dealing with the Indo-Pacific consider as a very important element in ensuring that our values and interests are successful. What has also struck me, I think, is the importance of continuous engagement. I think we are a long way away, and we need to make the case every day, sort of thing, that we are engaged with this region. So my role is important, I think, in demonstrating very much that we are committed despite the challenges that we have closer to home. So I think that's why I'm here. My job is indeed quite less intense day to day, but probably just as strategically important. So that's, for me personally, that's an interesting new challenge, to look at something where you have to look at the bigger picture over a longer time frame. You don't have to be dealing with the latest pronouncements of President Putin or Dmitry Medvedev, for example.
If I can, well, we may not come back to Putin, but we certainly will come back to geopolitics. If I can sort of walk you through a few of the key relationships in the region, and I guess, again, the challenges and opportunities and the uncertainties that we're facing with those. I think Australia's sought to really navigate its way as a middle power, but also an ally of the United States, and as a country that wants to see a rules-based system, a predictable system, and obviously a peaceful system upheld in the Indo-Pacific. The China factor looms large, and I think for Australia, in our own story over the past 10 years, for Europe in its own ways, we're all trying to come to terms with understanding what risk means as well as opportunity in the relationship with China. So can I foreground China at this point in the conversation, and perhaps ask you, I guess, how the European Union sees China in the Indo-Pacific strategic ecosystem, whether that has a relationship with, I guess, awareness of risk about China within Europe itself, including in the economic and technology and other areas. That would be a really useful way of, I think, understanding the strategic context for what you're seeking to achieve.
Okay, thanks very much. Just to complete maybe my answer on the previous question.
Oh, please.
I think we need to work with everyone. That was one of the other things that I have learned. So obviously we need to work with our most close like-minded partners.
Yes.
And we have a regular dialogue with the US. We have deep relationships with many of our other most like-minded partners. But I think, and I try to say this in the context of reforming the multilateral system, if we need to work beyond our traditional comfort zone, shall we say, and find ways of finding connections with all countries of the Indo-Pacific, no matter the degree to which we share values or not with them. On China, I think we came up with our China policy in 2019 with the triad of partner, competitor, systemic rival. And I think it's really stood the test of time, although our appreciation obviously is that the partner element is becoming more difficult and the competitor and the systemic rival are coming to the fore. It's only natural that we look at the China challenge through how it impacts on us, whether it's the massive trade deficit with the possibility that this is being brought about by illegal subsidization and so forth. So that's obviously to the forefront. But we are very concerned about economic coercion. You've suffered from it here. One of our member states has suffered from it in Europe. So there are linkages, I think, between some of the things that have happened in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe. And one of the lessons I think we take from the actions that China took against Lithuania is the importance of EU solidarity. I mean, this is part of the DNA of the EU, but I think it really shows that our collective solidarity does work when faced with these kinds of pressures. So this was a good lesson, I think, going forward with the broader challenge that China represents for the EU and the region. So obviously there are differences between how China sees us and how China sees other countries in the Indo-Pacific. But I think some of the answers are similar. We need economic security measures by everyone. We need to show collective solidarity. We need to stand up where we need to on respect for the rules-based international system. We know, for example, to take the South China Sea, we know that some of our ASEAN partners are naturally reticent to be particularly open about some of the actions of China. We certainly, I think as other partners, do make regular statements on some of the actions that China has taken in the South China Sea. So this is the kind of complementarity of action between those who are closer to China's actions and some of us who have either the political and economic weight or the advantage of distance to be more vocal.
Yeah, sometimes I think Europe's own weight and distance actually sometimes gives you the ability to be more forthright. One point of distinction, and I realise you're here representing the European Union, not NATO, but one point of distinction many of us in Australia are trying to understand is precisely whether the challenges of the Indo-Pacific are seen differently from a NATO perspective or an EU perspective. I think, Duncan Lewis, you had the pleasure of being ambassador to both EU and NATO when you were in Brussels some years ago. NATO, I think, describes China in a recent statement, describes China as not a partner, which is an interesting kind of formulation. And the EU has a sort of that triptych that you've mentioned. Do you see much sort of difficulty in navigating that difference, or how do member states approach that, do you think?
Well, obviously the memberships are different, so the decision-making is different in each organisation. But Nevertheless, I think EU-NATO cooperation has never been better. That's largely thanks probably to Mr. Putin.
He's back.
And we've seen obviously 2 EU member states join NATO recently. So in general terms, I think EU-NATO cooperation at the moment is in an extremely good place. And on the partner issue, I think it's only natural that EU is an economic actor and NATO isn't. So for us, as I said in my remarks, China will remain for all of us, EU, Australia, and everyone else on the planet, I think, a key economic player in our economic setups. So I don't see that there are great differences. NATO is NATO, the EU is EU. We work in different parts of Brussels, but seriously, the links between the 2 organizations, due to obviously the very pressing issue of Russia's invasion, have brought us closer together than I've ever seen them.
Can we go to some of the sub-regions of the Indo-Pacific, if you don't mind? Because you talked a bit about the diversity already, and this is a little bit heretical for someone like me who's long advocated the integration of the Indo-Pacific as a system, which in many ways it is. But of course, there's that diversity within. So Pacific Island countries see many of their challenges, understandably, in a certain way. Indian Ocean countries, likewise, Southeast Asia, somewhat different again. And each of these have their own institutions. So Pacific Islands Forum, ASEAN, and in its own way, in its own more embryonic way, the Indian Ocean institutions. It would be interesting to understand how you and European colleagues distinguish the sub-regions. Is there a very particular Pacific flavour to parts of what you're trying to achieve in the Indo-Pacific? To what extent is there a focus on ASEAN that's distinct again, and the Indian Ocean? In Australia, we've already had in the last few months some very distinct engagements, particularly with ASEAN and the Indian Ocean community, and it would be interesting to know how Europe sees that.
I think the diversity is a fact, but we have significant cooperation with 2 sub-regions, in particular ASEAN and the Pacific. The commemorative summit that we held in December 22 was designed effectively to demonstrate the long-standing and ever-growing cooperation between EU and ASEAN. And our commitment on that occasion was the 10 billion euro commitment in the area of sustainable connectivity and green transition. Given history, the Pacific has obviously been a focus of the EU since basically its creation. We are now, with the new Samoa Agreement, very much moving to an agreement of partnership. Therefore, the great thing about the new Samoa Agreement is the greater specification of our cooperation with the 3 ACP regions, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. And this really does allow us to step up our political engagement from what has been often a development-focused relationship. We're now able to step up our political engagement with the Pacific Islands. So that is a big shift. We had an event in Brussels in the margins of the February Indo-Pacific Forum with our Pacific partners to highlight the opportunities of the Samoa Agreement. I think this is an area where we're going to be taking forward our cooperation in the future. In the Indian Ocean, diversity is the name of the game there as well. And India's role is obviously crucial in that. We have our relationship with India, I think, as with many other countries, has flourished in recent years. So we're working on the FTA. Many of our member states are developing their defense industrial cooperation with India at great speed. We, I think, at the EU level, are looking to see how we can work with India on green transition, green hydrogen, and so forth. Its relations with its neighbors do not make regional cooperation straightforward, but we have very, very strong relations bilaterally with the other countries of South Asia. And as I said in my remarks, we've now joined the Indian Ocean Rim Association to try and demonstrate our commitment to the whole region.
Does the fact that I mean, you know, we keep talking about diversity, and I think there's obviously a great substance there, but does the fact that there is such a range of perspectives on a lot of the global geopolitical issues make it difficult, really, to pursue a comprehensive engagement with the region? And to be specific, you know, a number of countries in the region have not taken positions on Russia's invasion of Ukraine that converge with ours, or that we would like to see, certainly from an Australian perspective, and I'm sure from a European perspective. So how do you sort of navigate or reconcile that fact with the need to engage, whether it's with India or Indonesia or other significant Indo-Pacific powers?
I think, well, we have to deal with the world as it is, I think. So, I mean, that's one of the key lessons that we've learned in recent years. So countries are where they are in terms of Russia's invasion. We will keep making the case on every occasion, just as I did today, of the fact that Russia's invasion is a grave global issue. If the UN Charter is violated in Europe, it represents a risk everywhere else. I think one of the lessons, well, there are 2 points. Firstly, when you look at the G7 statements over recent years, there is a huge consensus amongst the major world players on Russia's invasion and also on issues related to the Indo-Pacific. So, I mean, I think we have seen a very big coming together of views over recent years, but we have to be smart, and it's not always most helpful if the like-minded partners kind of gang up and tell others what to do. So as like-minded partners, we have to consult more and see who is best placed often to pass particular messages to particular partners. This is today's world, and this is why I think we're in a much more sophisticated world as like-minded partners as to how we deal with others now, to bring them along the journey with us to a new international order which respects as you rightly said, what we achieved with so much difficulty after the Second World War.
I want to throw one more shadow into the conversation, Richard, and then beyond that, I'd really like to explore the question of really how can we learn from one another? How can we look inside Australian and European ways of engaging, whether it's with the Indo-Pacific or the need to really promote our stability, interests and values globally. But the shadow is not so much a country as a person. It's really interesting and I think challenging to ponder about how we're going to build and maintain solidarity among other democracies in the Indo-Pacific. If there is a change of administration in the United States in November, if we're dealing with the Trump factor regarding Europe, regarding the Indo-Pacific, regarding American engagement globally, what's the thinking in Europe at the moment about how we work together in the Indo-Pacific in that very real possibility?
Well, the transatlantic relationship is so important, I think, for both the US and for the EU. And we've seen many ups and downs over the decades in it. I happened to be dealing with the US and Canada at the time of the Obama-Trump transition. We got through it then. I'm sure we will get through it now. The relationship is so dense. The connections between the US and Europe generally, the EU as well, are so thick in all policy areas. Every day, one European or member state official is certainly talking to a US official. So that density of the relationship, I think, stands us in good stead. I'm obviously not going to take any kind of position on a matter which should be left to the American voters. But I do think that the transatlantic relationship is a very, very strong one, without in any way being complacent. And obviously, just as we did in 2016, we need to find points of common interest with every new US president and work to exploit those to the full. I think on the Indo-Pacific in particular, I really don't see that there may be a great change in the future, whatever the outcome of the elections. I think this is an area seen as a very challenging one for the future, both by the EU and the US, and there will be many points of interest to work together. And obviously on Russia-Ukraine, we will continue to make the case that this is, as I said, an issue of global importance where all democracies, like-minded countries, should work with others to ensure that the international rules-based system is upheld and that might does not succeed over right.
Thank you. I have a couple of other questions that I might try to fit in if we have time, but I do want to open up to the floor in a moment. Before I do that, just that point about learning from one another. I think that broader question that many of us have seen, for some years now, that looking inside the ways really liberal democracies are building resilience, building security in a comprehensive way, anticipating and preparing for some pretty awful shocks that the international system is throwing at us. There's clearly so much in principle that Australia and Europe can do in that regard, learning from one another. How are we doing? What occurs to you in that space?
I think there's great potential. In other words, I don't think we're doing enough. Is my point there. It's partly due to geography and the jet lag that we both suffer from when we travel to each other's regions.
Stay longer.
Regions, I think. To take some examples, I think we obviously are renowned worldwide for our regulatory system. The EU is a rules-based organization, and we do offer some examples of how we can tackle the new regulatory issues, as I've mentioned, in the digital and other spheres. In the climate area as well, and the green transition, we're not only regulating, but we're also cooperating and offer examples to others. So those are just two examples, I think, but we don't hold all the answers. And this is one of the things you were pointing to about learning from each other. Certainly we, and this is part of my job, obviously, when I come to the region, is to listen, because those of you who are slap bang in the middle of the Indo-Pacific region have much to tell us, and particularly when it comes to how we can best cooperate with small Pacific islands. We are very much in listening mode with our Australian and New Zealand friends to make sure that we make the right kind of impact in cooperation with our Pacific island partners, with Japan, Korea, Singapore, many Southeast Asian countries. We're learning from them about coping with a number of the digital challenges of the future. So those are just some examples, I think, of stressing the importance of learning from each other. And as I said, we need to do more on the EU-Australia front itself. We're both interested in how we can make the Pacific Islands more connected, and that's an area I think where we will be trying to explore in the future.
Well, thank you. Let's take some questions from the group in the room. So if you have a question, I believe we have a microphone that is circulating. We have two microphones that are circulating, so please get my attention and let's hear from you. Please. I think we have one over here, please, and please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ardi Stoyos. I'm the Dutch ambassador. Maybe an extension to the question that you just posed, Rory, with regard to the change in the White House. We also have elections within the EU. We recently had elections in my own country. There seems to be a great chance that the outcome of these elections will imply a move to the right. What does that mean to Europe's interaction with the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you. This is one of the things I love about the EU is how transparent, transparent we are in conversations about politics and policy. So thank you. Any other questions at this stage, or I'll throw it back to Richard. Go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks very much to the Netherlands ambassador for that question. Obviously, one, we don't want to prejudge the outcome of the elections. So let's see what emerges from the European elections in June. My sense is that whether it's the digital transition, the need to cooperate with advanced economies in the Indo-Pacific region, whether it's climate, these kind of broad themes are not going to be seen very differently, whatever the makeup of the new commission, the new governments of member states who have elections this year. I think one challenge that in fact, I talked about with the business community here yesterday is the issue of getting the highly skilled people that we need to manage the transition to a digital and green economy. This raises the issue of migration, and this is maybe the area where there will be the most sensitivity in all of our countries going forward as we try to ensure that we have the skill set to operate in the 21st century. But just as in the US, so as in Europe, I think my guess is that we won't see radical shifts in our Indo-Pacific approach following the elections.
Thank you. We have two questions here at the front. So, Ambassador of the Philippines.
Thank you. Thank you, Rory, and thank you, Richard, for giving us your insights on the Indo-Pacific region. My question is about how do you address this narrative going in the region about this concept of a rules-based international order as a Western concept? Because I think it's very important, especially now that if we look at the challenges that's facing us in the next few years on cybersecurity, on climate change, on pandemics, or even on transnational crimes. One country can probably make good use of these new challenges as having to say that this concept of a rules-based international order is now passé, and that we have to look at a new kind of a rules-based international order that is more centric or more focused on the region itself. Maybe it could be the East Asia region, maybe it could be the ASEAN region, or maybe it could be the Pacific Islands Forum, or the countries bordering the Pacific Island. My problem with that is that when you look at the actors now in the region, they're not just governments. Most of them are, of course, non-state actors, and of course, the stage is getting too tight that people get so confused, especially in young countries like in ASEAN, for instance, that they get involved or very much affected by the other narrative. Unfortunately, the proponent of that narrative is a country that is, we're all like-minded here, but more bordering on coercion. So my question is, EU and Australia being forerunners of this rules-based, How do we combat, how do we address this kind of narrative? How do we cooperate together as like-minded countries to say that, no, these are universal values. And whether it's past, present, or future, and no matter what kind of challenges we face, they remain important and relevant for humanity.
I think that's more than a question. Please. Yeah.
I mean, I tried to address that in my remarks because I do think it is one of the big challenges that all of us who are as like-minded as we are face. How do we make the case for a rules-based international order in today's world? And part of the answer is to make sure that it serves the interests of as many countries as possible. So this does mean, as I said, reform of the UN, the WTO, and the international financial institutions. It's vitally important that countries do see those institutions as working for them, whether it's in terms of economic development and raising countries and populations out of poverty, whether it's providing targeted finance for to combat climate change, and so forth. The other thing that I think we need to do is push those countries who have a different vision of a future order to explain what exactly they mean. So we mustn't be shy of having the discussion, I think, because I think when you dig down, many of the countries who are now tempted, shall we say, are tempted by the generalities and the fact that it's different from the current system is what they're saying. So it's a kind of an anti. They're attracted to an anti, just as many of our populations are when they go to the polls. They say we want to throw the old lot out and we'll try something else. So I think this explains the attitude of many countries to some of the new proposals that were put on the table. So my answer to that is let's have the discussion, including at the summit for the future. Let's try and dig deep as to what is actually being proposed as alternative rules-based orders and see whether that really fits the interests of countries who value their sovereignty, who value their territorial integrity, who value the values which are defined in their constitutions. So I think that's my answer. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ambassador Pernille, Ambassador of Denmark.
Thank you, and thank you for a great morning here. It's really inspiring to be here. I wanted to ask a little more about the climate and Pacific Islands and talking about the diversity. Both of you have been talking about how important it is that we recognize the diversity of the region and recognizing that certainly very often when we engage with the Pacific Island Forum, Pacific Island countries, and I know we have colleagues in the room here who can speak to that, there is a concern of disappearing, drowning in the big region and their issues not actually being addressed as we discuss Indo-Pacific because they're small countries on the rim of it, even if their issues, as in all of what you've been talking about, obviously, their issues are absolutely essential to the bigger picture as you were talking about, Richard. And I'm just wondering, we saw at COP28 where the small island states ended up not being there when the declaration was adopted, with a concern about not being fully included in the bigger stage issues. I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, from an EU perspective, our work on climate has very often in that part of the world been technical rather than political, that it's, you know, our support programs, our technical support programs that don't necessarily always look at the political aspects of it. And knowing that for that region, we're talking about survival. We're not talking about just climate. We're talking about some very security, political, important issues. So my question is, as this is the reality that we are in, and we are here looking at what can the EU and Australia do more of together for the years to come. What do you see in the area of cooperation between Australia and Europe with the Pacific Island nations on their concerns about the effects of climate change to them as an area where we can actually do and should do more together, not just on the technical side, but actually on the political side?
Thanks very much. I mean, I think we need to support them. We need to make sure that the loss and damage fund is up and running and operational as quickly as possible. We obviously, as EU, are huge contributors to that. We need to make sure that everyone else steps up as well. So there's lots of action, I think, at the broader international level that we can do to make sure that they know that we are pushing the broader international community to take their existential issues seriously. One of the important issues, I think, is their economic development, because it's not just about their survival, it's also how they can make a living in the world. So what we're doing as part of our new kind of cooperation programs is trying to see how we can support the natural advantages that the Pacific Islands has in their economic system. How can we support develop them to provide more income to the islands? And then the third thing I wanted to say is obviously the widespread support that we've had in the UN for some of the initiatives of the Pacific Islands themselves. I think that's where we can demonstrate that we are listening to them in particular.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room? Yes, we've got the auction has begun. The bidding's on. I'll start right at the back. Please, I think there was a question at the back. You had a question? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm a student at ANU and I'm doing an internship at the EU Delegation at the moment. Thank you very much for your remarks. I found them very interesting. Australia, in its engagement, particularly in the Pacific, has often been criticised in many different forums, whether for hypocrisy in its actions or for being perceived as patronising and colonial. Given the EU and Australia align in many different ways, describe themselves as like-minded partners, has the EU experienced any sort of similar resistance when engaging in the region, or experienced other obstacles trying to engage with countries, coming internally from the region?
Thank you. And I think that goes to that broader question of history and the fact that many of our countries do have colonial legacies. So how does that affect what Europe's trying to achieve?
I mean, I think on the one hand, it means that we're engaged. And as I said, in the Pacific, we've been engaged right from the beginning of the EU. And obviously, we have territory of EU member states in the Pacific region, which gives our role in the region a particular flavor. The critique of colonialism, that we're practicing a new form of colonialism, is not something that we hear only in this part of the world, but in other parts of the world as well. Our argument to that is very simple: is that the EU is a union of 27 member states, large and small. We have managed to pool our sovereignty in a way where the interests of all 27 are respected. And this kind of way of doing business is hopefully proof that we are not trying to impose solutions on our partners, and are looking for partnerships with them to take forward some of the common challenges we face. And I've been, personally as special envoy, I've been particularly pleased that the Czech presidency took such a strong interest in the Indo-Pacific during their 6-month presidency of the EU Council. This really demonstrates, I think, that this is a policy of all 27. So whether countries in the EU, and then obviously now we've had the Lithuanian national strategy on the Indo-Pacific as well. So this really reflects that the Indo-Pacific strategy is a policy of all 27, not just those who have been in the region for the longest. It's a policy of countries who have been subject to the effects of empire and colonialism, whether it's Soviet or British in Ireland's case. And therefore we're trying to show a new way of doing business with each other. So we hope that that is understood. It's certainly the kind of message that I pass, because I do discover when I visit the region that the effects of colonialism still drive the foreign policies of many of the Indo-Pacific countries. So I don't underestimate the challenge that we have in getting through this notion that the EU is a new kind of international actor.
Yeah.
So it's something I don't underestimate.
I think it's a really good theme. And Andreas, I'll come back to you in a moment if you don't mind, because I think speaking of countries that have been subject to imperial power in the past, Ambassador of Lithuania, I think I'll give you the floor.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. I know that Lithuania has been mentioned already twice in your excellent presentation, so thanks a lot for that. I do think it's a fantastic project that you are here and traveling into this fantastic continent, Australia. You know that Lithuania had opened up an embassy just two and a half years ago. So why we opened up here? Because you understand that with China, with all the other things we try to push, and of course to have a whole European Union to support us. But I'll be now asking the question about defense. You thank you very much. You already explained to all of us your support to Ukraine. Well, it's good to be here. It's 16,000 kilometers away from the war zone. War is happening. Now, there were some questions about internal political debate in the United States, a new president. Yes, we understand that we don't know what is going to happen, but there are some things that there are some questions whether the United States will finance Ukraine, for instance, now in the future. What kind of relations from the United States with NATO will be? On that side, we can see that European Union had good positions. You increase defense industries in European Union. You will be probably, Defense Commissioner will be part of the European Commission as well. Mm-hmm. I think it will be yet another step for European Union, not becoming just economic organization, but defense and security. I think it will be very important. You've been discussing in Australia with DFAT and with the security people, the Department of Defense. Would you be able to tell us if, for instance, if Australia is now looking at European Union, not just as to the United States and NATO, but to European Union as the security partner? I think it would be very important for all of us. Had Australia probably mentioned to you, will there be any yet additional support, lethal support and non-lethal support to Ukraine at this moment? So it will be, I would be very happy if you would be able to answer this. Thank you.
That's a question, obviously, that Australian people in the room may wish to take a view on as well. Of course, as I said in my remarks, we very much value the support that Australia has already shown in supporting Ukraine and sanctioning Russia. And we certainly know, and from my discussions yesterday, we know that you are looking at how you can take that further forward. My sense is that Australia does recognize the evolution of the EU towards not just a trade and development partner, but a broader partner. But I think geography does mean that we still need to develop that further in the security field. And obviously, Australia has developed this relationship with NATO, with the other members of the AP4, but it has not yet developed a kind of similar relationship with the EU. We in the EAS, and my Secretary General in particular, have been reaching out to Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand to build strategic discussions between those four key partners, and those will continue and hopefully enhance the understanding of the broader foreign security and defence role of the EU, complementary to NATO's. So I think there is work to be done in this region on making our partners understand the role of the EU. We hope that Operation Aspides, although of a small nature, also highlights the importance of our commitment to freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific and our ability to take military action when that is needed to protect freedom of navigation. So there's further progress to be done on our side. As you rightly said, we're at the beginning of a journey on trying to break down many of the barriers between our national defense ministries. There is considerable amount of duplication and waste in how we arm our armed forces. So this is the primary challenge of our new defense industrial strategy, I think, is how do we make more and more highly technologically advanced equipment for our armed forces in Europe to combat the challenges we're confronted. I think what we need to say to the United States is that Ukraine is not just an existential issue for Ukraine itself, but it's an existential issue for the whole of the EU. We have now made Ukraine a candidate country for the EU. That is a huge step and it's a huge commitment. It's going to change the EU. And to make good on that commitment, there can only be one result to the war. So we are in this for as long as it takes, and we have to succeed. So we hope that message is loud and clear to many of our like-minded partners, and that they will join us on that journey of ensuring success in that particular challenge we face on the European continent.
I get the sense that and thank you, Richard, for sort of suggesting the Australian colleagues will have something to add. I get the sense that the tenor of those remarks is many of us know how serious the EU and member states have become about security and strategy in recent years for obvious reasons. We need to keep the momentum of raising awareness of that in Australia. I think that's I think there are many elements of cooperation that are occurring, some of it quite quietly, but maintaining awareness of that, especially at a political level, I think, in my view, is going to be key. Andreas, you've been patient. I think you were next.
Thank you, Rory. My name is Andreas Radke. I work for German Political Foundation. Well, thank you very much for being here and for sharing all these valuable observations. There's been quite a bit of reference to the like-minded partners and to the large commonalities when it comes to joint aspirations for the region, joint values in approaching it, etc. So, United States, Canada, Japan, Korea, the Europeans, Australia, New Zealand, obviously. Over the past few years, we have seen quite a proliferation, I think, of formats in dealing with this region. I mean, there's been a lot of unilateral formats. There's obviously the Quad. There's the partners in the Blue Pacific. The EU has created its own new Indo-Pacific Forum. We also see that all these like-minded partners have a formidable or committing jointly formidable resources. If you're looking at these the Pacific aid map, the Southeast Asia aid map that the Lowy Institute provide, for example, and you look at the contributions of all these partners to the international institutions as well. If you take all that together, it's a huge effort that goes into the Indo-Pacific of these partners. If somebody gave you a bottle and a strange genie popped out that allows you only 3 work-related wishes, when it comes to how can we improve the coordination of these partners in their approach to the region, what would you wish for after these 18 months you've been in the job?
I would probably try and avoid having 3 work-related wishes and go for something else. Is my flippant remark. I think it's only natural, and it comes back to my point of making the most of our comparative advantages as like-minded partners. We shouldn't do all the same thing with every partner. I think we have to see who's best placed to further relations with each of our partners. So this is, I think, is my answer. My boss, High Representative Vice President Borrell, often says that we are living in a multipolar world, but a multipolar world where multilateralism is lacking. And I think that's very much the essence of how the EU looks at the situation. It's very good to have all of these minilateral fora, but they all have to work towards the rules-based multilateral order. I mean, I come back to my point that I've made already. I think the coordination on the Indo-Pacific in the G7 has been very, very significant, and that is a really, really good basis for seeing how each of the G7 partners rolls out our support to the countries. And obviously, in the field of energy transition, we now have these joint initiatives called Just Energy Transition Partnerships, where G7 partners are coming together to help various countries on that road to energy partnership. So we have started to identify areas where we can work together as major like-minded players, I think, always in the perspective of ensuring that multilateralism is at the basis of our work.
Can I add one observation there? And I know we're going to move, I think we'll move towards wrapping up before 12 o'clock. So if there are other questions, I'll be keen to see them in a moment. The Quad, we haven't talked specifically about the Quad. And if you're looking at minilateral arrangements in the region and globally, quite a few of the initiatives that you've spoken about, I mean, for example, maritime domain awareness, digital connectivity, these are all priorities on the Quad agenda for the region. What does EU Quad collaboration or convergence look like?
I would say it looks like an area that still needs to be explored. Yeah. We make a reference in our strategy of 2021 to the Quad, saying we're open to ad hoc cooperation with the Quad and its members. But I have to say that we haven't really filled that element of the EU strategy out very much yet. So I do think it's an area that we should look at further. Always bearing in mind that we don't necessarily want to be too vocal in how we are cooperating together to ensure that our partners are receptive to the ideas we're putting forward. And once again, this notion of avoiding ganging up and giving others the opportunity, precisely to come back to the Philippine ambassador's point, not to give the opportunity to others to indicate that this is a Western imposed solution. So that's, I think, where we have to be careful about our cooperation with the Quad and other minilateral formats.
Thank you. So there were one or two more questions, Oracle. I've got one question here. Are there any other questions that we can fill up the room? We'll start here, please, and then we'll move along the road.
Thank you
There's
so
one over there. Yes, Rory, there's one over there to the left. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador of Estonia. And thank you for being here. My question was actually inspired, I think, by Pernille. And so I would like to go back to Pacific, because a number of us who are here ambassadors, we also accredited to Pacific, and we often travel there to Pacific Islands. And when the strategy was adopted, one of the criticism was that it's strategy for half of the world. And Pacific is just like an add-on, or it's often just like a, let's put it somewhere, and they felt that they don't get the attention that they deserve. How would you counter that argument? How would you say that it is truly Indo-Pacific and the Pacific Islands is truly part of the strategy? Thank you.
No, I think that's a good observation. We know that the Pacific Islands are not the most content with the whole concept of the Indo-Pacific. So that is important to take into account as we cooperate with them. I think our answer is that we have a very, very specific relationship with our Pacific partners based on the now Samoa Agreement and our very strong historic links with the region, including with the territories of member states in the region. So, I mean, I think that's the basic answer, is that geopolitically, the whole Indo-Pacific region is linked, and we hope that our Pacific partners realize that on the one hand, but then in terms of how we cooperate practically with the different countries of the Indo-Pacific region and the different sub-regions, we try and be as tailor-made as possible. I think that's in short my answer.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. My name is Per Linnér and I'm with the Swedish Embassy. You pointed out that Europe and Indo-Pacific is part of the same geopolitical theater, and also, of course, you have outlined our shared interest, of course, both the region and with Australia in terms of rules-based international order, and of course also the credibility of our alliances, primarily with the United States. But moving ahead and not only looking at the upcoming American elections, but perhaps for the next decade or so, how do you see the risk that we start to compete about the attention and resources of the United States, and how should we avoid that? Thank you.
Can I just check I got your question right before you give the microphone? How do all of us like-minded compete for the attention of the US?
Yes, exactly. Australia and the wider Indo-Pacific region, given that, I mean, since the Second World War, I think it's fair to say that Europe and the United States have shared the military dimensional threat with regards to Russia. But obviously, we are in a different situation now, perhaps also in relation with China. Thank you.
I mean, the transatlantic alliance is there. It's treaty-based. We've seen 2 EU member states join NATO recently. So I think the transatlantic relationship is strong and it's there. There are security treaties between the US and partners in the Indo-Pacific region, and I don't think they're going to change either. We're not in competition with the US in the field of security alliances in this region. We respect the role of the US in the region. We respect the treaty arrangements that Australia has and Japan has. We each have to play to our strengths, I think. Coming back to my answer to the Lithuanian ambassador, I think demonstrating that we are serious ourselves as the EU, as a geopolitical actor, is probably the best way that we can demonstrate the interest of other countries in working with us. So if we're serious about our economic competitiveness and we remain at the forefront of the green transition and we develop our security and defense industry role, then we're attractive to other partners. So everything begins internally with the EU, I think, and externally we will not regard the different partners as the same. US we have a particular relationship with. Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand we have other relationships with, and that goes for the sub-regions of ASEAN and the Pacific Islands as well. So I mean, I remain, obviously, as you've heard, resolutely optimistic about the future, despite the shadows that Rory has mentioned in his introductory remarks. But optimism has to begin on the basis of what we do to strengthen the EU itself, I think.
We have time for one more question, please.
Thank you. My name is Martina Zapf. I work with the Development Intelligence Lab here in Canberra, a think tank working on development in the Indo-Pacific. I'm also European by background, I'm German, and my substantive background is in peace building. So I'm by nature, I'm by nature very interested in de-escalation and how do we lower tensions. So I would like to pick up on your point where you cited High Representative Borrell about a lack of multilateralism. And I'd be interested to know what are the lessons, especially from your work in Europe and with Russia, on how can we foster more multilateralism here in the region, where there's a proliferation of the multilateral fora of like-minded cooperation. But where do we create spaces and strengthen spaces where there is ongoing dialogue that cuts across the blocks, like we used to have in the OSCE in Europe, and of course, however imperfect that institution was and broken down now, but at least while it did work, and before obviously the escalation of the Ukraine invasion, it was a space where there was dialogue between Europe and Russia. It seems to me that there's an absence of such a space and institutional framework here in the region. So I'd be very interested in your thoughts on that, any lessons from multilateralism across blocks in the European space that could be applicable to the region or of interest to reflect on.
That's a good one. I mean, I think the OSCE does offer examples at the kind of technical level for how conflict prevention and crisis management could be done in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think there are ongoing technical discussions with a number of partners. So even though the OSCE is where it is at the moment, I think some of the skill set that has been developed in the OSCE over the past 50 years can be used as examples in this region. I wouldn't want to suggest to the Indo-Pacific partners what their kind of security or confidence building arrangements should be. It's, as we've already said throughout this session, it's highly diverse, and even within the existing regional structures such as ASEAN, it's already difficult enough to establish confidence in those regions. I mean, I think we are in a different world. I mean, the OSCE was established at the height of the threat of nuclear annihilation, and that kind of concentrates the mind quite effectively. I don't think we're there with all, despite what Putin and Medvedev might say rhetorically, I don't think we're there in that situation today. So different arrangements may be needed for different periods of history, but I do think that the kind of technical skill set of the OSCE does have things which are of relevance for this region as well.
So, Richard, I think you've, for someone who's travelled from the other side of the globe in the last not so many hours, I think you've provided us with a really fluent and comprehensive set of perspectives. I know there's a lot of food for thought, and shortly there'll be an opportunity over lunch to, I guess, network and discuss some of these ideas further. I just want to leave you with maybe two thoughts, if I might. And firstly, we've got this afternoon several expert panels, so you'll get a sense of some of the expertise that's based in this town, some of which is Australian, some of which is from our friends from Europe and the region. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions this afternoon, because I think it would be useful to understand what are the questions that are unanswered for you in your endeavours. And I guess, finally, that going back to that question of expectations on Australia, the EU-Australia relationship in the context of our separate but shared Indo-Pacific strategies, what would you see as the homework for us all to take away?
That's a very good question. I mean, I would obviously say that we still need to complete the FTA negotiations to demonstrate the economic and strategic importance of our relationship. And I think if we put that in place, it will help generate the relevance of the overall relationship, and we'll be able to go to a more strategic level. But that's a matter for our political bosses and our negotiators to decide when that happens. But I think this notion that the FTA being a way of opening up a strategic perspective of our cooperation is quite important. Then we have to do more on the green transition together, I think. And as I said at the beginning, if we can finalize our partnership on critical raw materials, that will provide some real kind of economic interest both ways between the EU and Australia. And then the final thing, obviously, is this notion of listening to each other, of what we can both bring to the Pacific Islands, and make sure that we do this in a coherent way. And final point, I think the great thing about the Australian perspective is that you have moved from, how can I put it, a purely Pacific perspective to seeing the linkage with the other side on the Indian Ocean. And that's obviously important for us in Europe, that a Pacific partner sees the importance of the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. It's a long voyage and a big horizon, but we're in good company. So thank you.
Can I say one thing? Yes. Which I forgot to say in answer to your first question to me, which is one of the things.
Well, you had your questions for us now. That would be
no. It's the answer. It's the answer which it's a reference that I should have made right at the beginning in answer to your first question. Is one of the things I obviously did when taking up the job was Google for books on the Indo-Pacific. There is very little out there. At least there was when I was looking to take up the job from Gabriele. One of the things that came up was a certain book by a certain author called Rory Medcalf. Oh, right. And so I read the updated version with the new introduction, and that really is a good introduction for somebody coming new to the region about some of the challenges. So thank you for having written that and making my job so interesting.
Well, what can I say? Thank you, Richard. Please.